What makes the achievement of emotional sobriety so difficult is the habits we have, the patterns we have in our behavior, the habitual ways that we've come to think about things. We have to really become aware of those things in order to challenge them, because the consciousness that has created a lot of the problems in our life cannot solve it, cannot change things. So what happens is the first step is waking up. We've been exploring now for some time how the steps help develop what we're calling an authentic self-esteem, a self-esteem that's grounded in humility, what Nathaniel Branden would describe as true self-esteem. The way that we've been organizing this is that Herb Kagan kicks us off in discussing the particular step we're on, followed by Roger Andes, who focuses on self-esteem and the step and how it ties into the step. And then Thom Rutledge comes in and brings his nutshell wisdom to the discussion. And now I follow up with kind of summarizing and highlighting a few things that I think are very important in terms of the process involved with the step. Now, if you've heard me discuss the steps before, I really believe that they follow a charge-discharge kind of energetic process, meaning that step one develops this charge, right? I like to think of it as creating an existential crisis. You know, we're powerless and that we've made our lives unmanageable. And that creates this charge, right? My God, I'm in trouble and I don't know what to do to turn things around. And that crisis needs a resolution. And step two creates the resolution that there is hope, that we can regain our sanity, our soundness of thinking. And so now that resolves that crisis, but now it builds a new charge. How is it that I can realize this hope in my life, the possibility that step two promises us or offers us? And then step three comes in and four and so far, and it builds this charge-discharge. Now, the charge that was built in step five was admitting to ourselves and to another human being and to God the exact nature of our wrongs. So we sat down and we started to really think deeply about how we created our existence. Bill says it that we come to a point in the program that we accept that our troubles are of our own making. Now, for many of us, that's an incredibly different way of thinking, especially for those of us that are very, very apt to blame others for our problems and for what's going on. So our shift in consciousness is taking place throughout the steps. So we make this revelation, and we have our witness by hopefully an enlightened witness, someone that can give us some guidance. But now the charge is we're left with this awareness of the exact nature of our wrongs. What are we going to do? What are we going to do to start to turn our life around? And once again, here comes the discharge in step number 6, and another charge is we're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. So let us focus on the "were" part, that we're entirely ready. Well, what does that mean? Well, I am not an English major, so please forgive me if I butcher this. But I looked it up today, and "were" is a subjunctive of be. And what that means is that it's relating to that it denotes a mood of verbs expressing what is imagined or wished or possible. So when we are getting entirely ready, what we're looking at is a new possibility in our life, a possibility of now transcending and transforming these ways that we've been functioning and discovering some new possibilities. This is an incredibly important step. You've heard me say before, this is the step that we pivot towards emotional sobriety. And I think you'll see what I mean by after I go through this. So now let's focus on how do we get entirely ready, completely ready to have these defects of character removed. What needs to take place? Well, I think the following are some of the paths to readiness that I think create a intention, if you will, or a mindset that gets us open to the possibility of changing these things. The first is pain. We talk about pain as a touchstone of spiritual growth, right? We talk about that many of us have had an emotional bankruptcy, an incomprehensible demoralization is what we've experienced in our life. Or some of us are just sick and tired of being sick and tired, that we haven't hit that incomprehensible, demoralization. Pain is an incredibly powerful motivation. You know that when you're in a lot of pain, let's say you have a dental problem and your tooth is killing you, you'll move heaven and earth to get to the dentist. If you have a broken leg, you can't wait for the doctor to heal it, right? To put a cast on it to begin the healing process. But pain is not a sufficient motivation because it cannot be sustained unless you stay in pain. I like to think of it as the 100-yard dash motivation. If you're in pain, you'll just run like hell for those 100 yards to get to the finish line. But what happens after your pain abates, after your pain is resolved? If you got a hole in your roof, you want to fix it when it's raining out and the water's pouring down on your head. But if you live in Southern California, you can live with that hole in the roof. Well, not now. I guess you guys are getting a lot of rain out there for a long time. So that's one path to readiness, is to get ready by experiencing and allowing yourself to feel the pain. It's not an easy thing to do, especially those of us that have avoided pain our whole life, but it becomes a necessary path to getting ready to make these changes. The second path, it's a very different motivation, and it's a growth motivation. It's a motivation that's based on self-actualization. You see that it's built into us that we have a strong tendency to actualize what is possible. It's a compelling nature that moves us towards wholeness, towards integrity. And that is built in, that growth force is inside you and me. That motivation, once you let that take a hold of your life, it's sustainable. And this is what keeps a lot of people going to meetings. I'm in my 51st year of recovery, and I'm as excited as before. Herb Kagan just celebrated 39 years. I think Thom Rutledge celebrated, if I remember right, Thom, was at 36 years. I mean, we're all probably even more excited about recovery today than we were before because we've been bit by that bug, by that growth bug. This is the desire to become what we can be, to become our true self, to become our best self. And you're going to see that that's what this step is really about. The third path to readiness that I put down, and that's Bill's talks about a lot in the 12 and 12, is understanding the function or benefits of our character defaults, we've come to call them in this meeting, thanks to Glenn, or what I like to think of as our compromised adaptations or our insufficient adaptations. Now, what does that mean? Well, to understand the benefits of it, we have to understand that everything that we've developed, every behavior we developed, is developed because it's economical. We do it because it economizes our distress. I worked with this one man. Used to give lectures every Saturday at the at the Torrance office of the National Council on Alcoholism. And every Saturday, this one guy come in and he would wear this T-shirt that said, "Before you ask, the answer is no." Now, that wasn't just a fun T-shirt. This is how this man lived his life. And one day his family volunteered to come up and do a demonstration with me. And guess what they all confronted him about? His teenage daughter said, "Dad, every time we ask you anything, it's no. And then you get mad that we go running to mom because mom's a bit more flexible than you and she might be able to say yes to us." Well, how come he was a no? How come there was no possibility of a yes? Well, it economized his distress, because when you make a decision, you have to weigh in your mind, is this the right decision or not? But if there's no decision, you don't have any anxiety about it. So the answer is no. We're just done. Now, it also tells you what is missing in his life is that there's no flexibility. He's rigid. There's no ability to roll with the punches, to flow with someone, to be coordinated with. So he becomes very isolated and alone. And it also tells you something about what is needed, that nobody ever said yes to this man. He never had an experience of yes. He grew up in a family of no's, and he's created that same thing. So it's very important to understand that every one of our behaviors, especially the ones that are causing us a lot of trouble in our life, have a function. There's a benefit of them, and we need to understand them if we're going to be able to give them up. The fourth path to readiness is a recognition of our need to be reorganized in our personality, to be reintegrated, to have a better balance. You see, Fritz Perls defined mental health as an appropriate balance and coordination of all of what we are. So it's being able to organize our personality in such a way, or the different parts in our personality in such a way, is that they contribute to our healthy functioning, that they make a contribution to our wholeness. And we can only do that by bringing the parts of us that are in conflict into harmony. So there's a recognition of that. We need to do that work. The fifth path to readiness is an alignment with reality. Reality is that we'll never be cured on these things, as Bill said. The idea that I can solve these things, and once I'm done solving it, the work is done and I can move on. It's fantasy. The bigger issues in our life are going to be themes that are present in our life for the rest of our lives. That doesn't mean that we can't make substantial progress and diminish the impact that these things have on our experience and on those people we love and care about. But Bill says it this way. He says that we shall have to be content with patient improvement along these lines, and give up this black and white thinking that we can just solve it and then now we're done with that, let's move on. The sixth path to readiness I put down is that we're putting the best of us in charge of the rest of us. This is our pivot towards emotional sobriety. I think that what we're doing in this step is we're committing to reinstate our true self, or our best self, in the leadership role. In terms of who's driving the bus, we're going to put our best self or our true self in this, and we're going to impeach our false self or dethrone it. The part of us that thinks that we have to, I am more the more I have. And you see, Bill said this very clearly. He says we lost sight of that character building was really the important goal in our life, not amassing more things, not having more things. Another path to readiness, this is path number 7 that I have down, It's a path of willingness. We talked about willingness is the key. And what is this, a willingness? It's a willingness to experiment, to try things on. We won't know a priori if this is going to be better for us or if this is going to work good for us. But if we have an experimental attitude towards our life, then we're going to be able to try things on and discover some new possibilities that are very different than the things that we've been doing. Because remember, when we resolved this early anxiety in our life, then we became very fixed in our behavior. Means that there's a certain rigidity that each one of us has, that our behavior becomes stereotyped, very much like that man who says no all the time. And that as we start to grow along these lines, we become more flexible, we become more spontaneous. Number 8 is we're replacing perfectionism with a perfect ideal. That we are striving to make progress along the lines of this perfect ideal. My mentor, Dr. Kempler, said, hey, there's nothing wrong with striving for perfection as long as you never fool yourself into thinking you can achieve it. We can't achieve it. We must stay grounded in humility. That's what all of these steps are doing. They're deflating the ego, and they're replacing that ego deflation with humility. And we are saying that that's the foundation for really true self-esteem. Number 9 is that we are learning to triage in our life. We're learning to prioritize things. Only the best in us can see the worst in us. You've heard me say that many times. And the way that we have to think about this step is as we start to work on these things that are causing trouble in our life, that we need to take the biggest ones. This is what Bill says. He says, we shall have to come to grips with some of our worst character defects and get to work on remedying them, on straightening them out, get to work on them. Dr. Nathaniel Branden says, only when we become conscious of our self-sabotaging beliefs do we become able to change our behavior. So as you can see, this step involves a lot of awareness, a lot of increasing our consciousness, living consciously, being very, very thoughtful about how we go ahead and now take on this challenge of now letting the best of us run the rest of us. Now, I just want to read one final thing before I invite my colleagues in, is I want to make a discrimination between when we're facing these things, how we face them in what I would call a healthy way versus how we face these things in a self-destructive way. And it's the difference between taking responsibility versus self-pity. This is what Dr. Nathaniel Branden says in his book, The Disowned Self. He says, to face one's painful emotions, to experience them fully, to acknowledge them, to listen to the message they contain concerning one's frustrations, and perhaps to describe in words what one is feeling requires courage and honesty. It is not an exercise in self-indulgence. To be self-pitying is to make no effort to deal with one's suffering or to understand it, to complain of it while seeking to avoid confronting it. Think of that again. To complain about it, right? To complain of it while seeking to avoid confronting it. A lot of times we will complain about it and fool ourselves into thinking we're doing something about it. It's very different. And to indulge in thoughts or utterances about the cruelty of life, the futility of struggle, the hopelessness of one's predicament, the unfairness of fate, and so forth. To say, right now I am feeling hopeless is not self-pity. To say my situation is hopeless is usually self-pity. In the first instance, one is describing a feeling. Hear that. One is describing a feeling, observing the feeling. In the second, one is making a statement of alleged fact. Descriptions of feelings, however painful, can be therapeutic. Statements of alleged facts about life or the world, motivated solely by one's painful emotions of the moment, generally are self-destructive. In the first case, one takes responsibility, the responsibility of awareness. In the second case, one abandons responsibility and surrenders to passivity. This is a distinction of the most vital importance. All right, with that said, let me invite Roger and Herb and Thom into the room with me, if you guys can join me, and I will pass on the discussion to you, gentlemen.
Hey, guys.
Good evening, Thom, Herb, and Al.
Hey, Alan, before you get
Oh,
started.
good. You know all our
someone-
names. Great.
Hey, Alan, before you get started, someone was asking what the fourth path was, or if you have those written down at all, we could share it at some point.
Yeah. The fourth path was a recognition of needing to be reorganized.
Thank you.
I was getting a little concerned that Michael McGee might have gotten to you, because Michael McGee, the master of immense amounts of content when he presents. I mean, the man has so much. It's just rich with content, and he'll do a list of 50 things. And I thought, oh my God, Alan's been hanging out with Mike.
I only had 9 today.
I know. I was glad you didn't feel the compulsion to round that up to 10.
Well, to 12, it would be Dr. 12.
Oh, that's right. Oh my God.
12. I mean, look, I was trying. I couldn't squeeze 3 more out of it. Trust me. That was
you keep thinking about it. It'll happen.
He'll get it. Yeah, he will. He will. Well, I just want to say one quick thing, and I'll turn it over to the other guys. It's like, I really like what you're talking about motivation, because and I don't know if this is specifically about step 6, other than it really is. Step 6 is that place of where this transition for how we're going to do this as daily practice in our lives is. But the idea that it happens multiple times, but most of us have stories in early parts of our recovery where we can say how we initially found ourselves in seeking help, and usually it's by negative goals, meaning I want to avoid getting a DUI. I want to avoid my wife leaving me. I want to avoid this or that, and it's like, and I've told people forever, it's like those are wonderful motivations, and they certainly, the pain you're talking about really moves us to a place. And one of the things we have to watch when we begin the process, and we watch it with each other as we help people through this, is that the idea that fairly early on, and I don't know if there's any time frame specifically, but fairly early on, there will be naturally a shift in motivation to where you're not so much moving away, you're not primarily moving away from things, but you're moving towards something. It's I think about, like, if I think about why I don't pick up a drink, or why I'm not practicing assholism today, all the stuff that I avoided from the beginning of that, my wife being upset with me or leaving me, or legal problems, whatever, it still works. I avoid all that stuff, but that's not what I think about. If you ask me why I'm sober, why I have a daily practice of emotional sobriety, it's like, no, it's because I like what this life gives me. But I always want people to practice, what the Buddhists talk about, loving kindness towards yourself as you go through that process, so that you get to the place, we don't necessarily start there. We sometimes just start just because, we're in a lot of pain, and we're trying to save our asses. Amen.
Amen.
Herb, are you ready to offer some comments?
I'm always ready to comment. Are you kidding?
It was a rhetorical question.
Yeah,
Herb.
Yeah, what you were really saying, Roger, is I want to go last.
That years of silence will do that to a man.
Yeah, no, it's so wonderful. And again, pressing buttons and all of that. I was writing a lot of notes and I'm going to talk a little bit about them. And then I stepped back from it because we can get lost in the weeds here. So what's the point? What are we doing here? We're making an effort to identify the obstacles in us, the darkness, to the light in us, so that we can connect to the light and have power. So step 4 is about identifying the exact nature of the obstacle. And step 6 is another inventory, the exact nature as to how that manifests in our inclinations and behaviors. So it's really simple. It's a diagnostic. I have to know what the problem is in order to be able to deal effectively with the problem. And this whole section of steps 4 through 7 is about establishing and healing a relationship with myself. Step 4, the obstacle. Step 6, the manifestation of the obstacle in inclinations and behavior. It's a very powerful distinction, not made in the big book, but experienced in my attempt to apply those steps. More about that when we get to step 7. And Alan, you said something about, I put down unhealthy habits, but you said unhealthy adaptations that have become habits. I mean, I love that. The word I use in helping people to attempt to identify the exact nature of this unhealthy adaptation is, what are you defending? What are you defending? To see, again, as we have in step 1 and in step 4, the powerlessness of, or the ineffectiveness of our efforts up to this point of changing. Most people won't make the distinction, certainly in the beginning, between inclination and behavior. But for me, that was critical. I saw that I was powerless in step 6 to be faithful, because that had been my Achilles heel my entire life. And once I got to step 6, I was able to see that, and connecting to step 7 next time, I was able to see that I'm powerless. And apparently I am powerless, despite what I know and how I've tried. I'm powerless over the inclination, but I'm 100% responsible for the behavior. And that split helped me not manage, that would be the wrong word, heal. That's the right word. To heal from that. The inclination stayed around for a long time, but the behavior was able to change when I became aware of it and accountable for it. Thank you.
Yes. Another amen.
Wow. Thank you, Herb.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, do better than that, Roger. That's it.
This isn't a competition.
Oh, that's right. You keep telling me.
Remember Nathaniel's adage, self-esteem is neither comparative nor competitive. Okay. Thank God.
I'm sorry. I'm in the wrong room. I gotta go.
Mine would be so low that I would not dare to speak at this point after Herb's eloquence. Thank you, Herb. Very much so. So, Alan, as you were going through these paths to readiness, it's like, taking one word or we're ready, or 2 words from the wording of step 6, and then expanding it in this way is what I'm so struck by. What helps us people be ready to look at our imperfections, right? At our character defects, as is talked about in the 12 steps, or just our flaws, our faults, our imperfections. Can't remember the exact wording you used, but our insufficient adaptations. That was it. I like that a lot, Alan.
Yeah.
I think what I want to say tonight is in a group that I did today in a treatment program. It was based on your chapter 5 from 12 Smart Things to Do When the Booze and Drugs Are Gone. What's your subtitle? Choosing Emotional Sobriety Through Self-Awareness and Right Action. So Alan wrote an emotional sobriety book before he wrote his most recent emotional sobriety book, Essential Insights. But the part that I focused on was the theme of self-support. As one of our participants shared a few meetings ago, the process of looking at our character defects, if we don't know how or don't have the ability to support ourselves, can be incredibly challenging, even at least in the short term, add immensely to our pain and even, hopelessness in my experience. But what helps me most when I'm trying to hear others offer me information about my imperfections, or when I'm trying to look at them myself, to remember that the only real grounding I have is the one that you keep referring to, Alan, is grounding in humility in my life. And as I observe my ego arising, and as I observe my imperfections arising, and especially with me, as I observe my defenses and self-protectiveness arising. And it's not always through, arguing or being aggressive. With me, more often than not, it's through withdrawal, right? It's through passivity. But whatever our style is, what I keep going back to, because I lose it so often, and that's what I want to emphasize, is my sense of, as you've talked about, Thom, I matter here, and I matter no more than anyone else, and I matter no less than anyone else. Because to me, humility is much more than the American psychological definition of it talks about. To me, when I am connected with it, and much of the time I am not, that's why I have to keep refocusing on it. It's an experience, it's a state of mind for me, as much as it is a list of criteria or a list of even behaviors. The acknowledgement of imperfections, right? Relatively low emphasis on self, a realistic rather than, diminished or exaggerated sense of my attributes and my assets. I keep coming back to the present moment and what I'm experiencing in this moment, and trying to see as clearly as I can all of the activity of my ego. And I can't do it most of the time. I can't. I don't have enough awareness. It's so deeply built into me, those ego with a capital E, self-protections, that there's so much of it at any given moment I can't see. But if I keep regrounding myself in the idea of humility, in the idea of just being present, just being as present as I can, something happens for me that is a kind of sacred experience where I'm able to be caring about myself and caring about others in ways I'm just unable to be when my ego or my need to appear a certain way is in charge. So I realize I'm talking very abstractly and esoterically now, but it's what getting in touch with my imperfections, what getting in touch with all the things I wish were different about me. More than anything else, that brings me to a sense of connection with my humility. It brings me to a sense of connection that's not my ego, to something other than my ego with a capital E. So that's all I wanted to share. I really liked your descriptiveness, Sal, of all the ways that we can find increased readiness to come into reality, right? The reality of our imperfection, and feel better, feel more self-esteem, as we've talked about.
So if I zoom out now, instead of zooming in and looking at those specifics, if I zoom out, like kind of what Herb was doing, see, this step is really setting us up to change, to really develop what Bill referred to in relationship to our, he called them character defects, the best possible attitude. But to me, it's a much more general focus than that. It's our best possible attitude towards ourself, towards our problems, towards our relationship with others, as we're going to see here. We're going to start to take some major responsibility in terms of how we've harmed people and take responsibility. We're going to also shift our attitude towards reality and life itself. See, this step is that pivot towards an alignment, right? It's towards an alignment with reality. And I think we've got to think of this. This is a pivoting towards the best possibilities. And that's so important here, because before we couldn't imagine these things. That's why I really loved when I looked up that what does were mean is thinking about possibilities here. This is opening up the door for the discovery of so many things that our consciousness, because it is what it is. You know, what's the line? You guys have heard Herb say this a million times. I don't know what I don't know. I can't see what I can't see. I can't think what I can't think, right? I can't have a consciousness that is going to permit other things happen until this consciousness begins to change. That's what Bill, I think, meant when he said more will be revealed, because as we change, so does our consciousness and all of these things. It's a very, look at, this is one of the things that I love about the program and the steps. It's transformative. It is really transforming us in very, very substantial ways. And, you know, with all the, you know, in the mental health profession, a lot of my colleagues criticize AA and says, you know, the big problem with AA is it's a cop-out, because you're saying you have a disease and you're not taking any responsibility. And my goodness, I've never seen any program require as much responsibility for ourselves as is required if we work these steps. Somebody that says that has never been to a meeting and clearly has never worked the steps. I mean,
well, they don't just understand the basic dynamic. Yeah,
they don't. It's unfortunate, because this is radical responsibility.
yeah.
I mean, this is radical. I mean, it is counterculture. I mean, it is radical. There's no blame taking place here at all. It's the total acceptance of responsibility for the existence we've created. So thanks, guys. This is a wrap on step 6. We're going to kick off step 7 next week with you, Herb, if you would kick us off on step 7.
I hear a lot of people criticize the 12 steps, that they're old-fashioned. I can understand that criticism. They were written back in 1935. Some people that are agnostic have difficulty with the word God used in the steps. For me, I look at the process that's involved. The forces that the 12 steps generate are so powerful that I think they're ageless. There's this interesting phenomena that happens when you work the steps. They create a charge and then a discharge. You know, the first step, we're powerless. Our life has become unmanageable. It creates this charge. You know, we're in big trouble and we don't know what to do. And then step 2 comes along and it says we have hope. That charge, that existential crisis that we have is resolved. What's happening here is parallel to life. We charge ourselves when we breathe in. When we exhale, we discharge. That's the rhythm of life. And the way I love to think about the 12 steps, it's helping us get connected to the rhythm of life so we can learn how to show up in a good way.